Well, alrighty, welcome back to another episode of Generation to Generation, Bridging the Gap with Rex.
And Eva, and we're so
And we are
excited.
so excited.
We are. It's a little weird doing it on video,
It is a little weird doing it on video.
but it's all right. It's all right. We're gonna figure it out. We may not be able to be so excited anymore, but we are very excited that you're here with us, and we're excited to be back. It's been a wild couple weeks. We've not been super consistent. I apologize, but we've been busy. We've had stuff going on, so
We have a graduating senior in the house.
so excited. Oh my gosh, I'm so ready to be done. I gave my thesis this week. That was a huge deal. That was my priority. It was like, I don't want to talk to anybody. I don't want to do anything. I got to focus on this. And I did. And it was so much fun. And I was probably not as nervous for it as I should have been. I've been joking all week that I should title this year things I should be more nervous for, but I'm not, because I think Mama and you were more nervous for me than I was. And even though I had a moment where my brain just completely forgot what I was supposed to say next, I don't even really care about that. And I was telling the guy at the coffee shop today, I was like, the grade doesn't matter to me anymore. I did my best work. I put in the work. I did the research. I know what I did. I know that was my best work. And if my grade doesn't accurately represent what I believe was my best work, that's totally all right, because I know it was still my best. And so it was a lot of fun. I'm so excited to be done with it. I'm free, but it kept me busy.
Well, just to give some context to that and catch people up a little bit, one of your requirements for your particular high school is that you must do a 25-minute, well, 15-minute. It's a
Yeah.
15-minute oral presentation followed by 25 to 30 minutes of actual defense, where you have a pre-selected panel with your thesis instructor that they rotate through
Yep.
a series of questions.
It was a
And
faculty
then they
advisor.
open
Yep.
it up at the end to whoever has signed on to the Zoom call, audience participation. So at the end of the day, it is a 1 hour thesis presentation and defense, and you did exceptional. And so you did. You and I talked about this. You stumbled out of the gate. And Eva, there are a lot of adults that if they stumbled the way you did for
Yeah.
just a second, they couldn't recover mentally. So, when it happened, I was in the room with you. I was not on
He
the
was
Zoom.
really, he was very, we just got to tell you now, he did the most amazing thing. So, where I had my laptop sitting for the Zoom call was on a half wall over our stairs. And for an hour, he stood directly across from me on the stairs so that his eyes were sitting right above my camera. So I could make eye contact with him the entire time so I wouldn't look around while presenting. And I did stumble, in the opening lines of my speech, something I had practiced over and over and over again. I was trying to prepare myself for what was coming next and just blanked. And I just paused for a moment and I took a breath and I was just like, and I kept going and it was great. And I really at the end of it, I completely forgot I had stumbled. It did not affect my speech. I did not dwell on it. And by the end of it, I almost you kind of had to remind me that I stumbled, because I kept going. It
You
was not
forget.
something that, yeah, I completely
Yeah.
forgot about it. And I was focused
Yeah.
on answering my defense questions. And it didn't as soon as I started going again, I kind of forgot that I stumbled. It wasn't frazzling. And it was just because of, I was like, I knew I was going to stumble. And you told me this. You said it, honestly, it's really good that you stumbled in the beginning, because by the time you got to the end of your speech, people forgot that you had done it, because you had presented so well the other fifth, the next 15 minutes, that they forgot that you took 3 seconds to catch your breath because you forgot your words. And
That's
it was just really
touchdown.
great.
And the lesson learned is that people don't remember how you start, they remember how you finish.
Yep.
And you finished strong. So again, well done.
It was a
Well,
lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. This has just been a really good week. I took my last math test. I made an A on it. This is the first time since middle school I've made an A in a math class. My teacher that made me fall in love with learning again, she was at my thesis. A bunch of friends were there supporting me. And that was something I had to get over too during it. I was not every time I give a presentation like that, everybody there is going to love and support me. But every single person sitting in that Zoom room, all 40 of them, they were there because they loved and supported me, because they wanted to see me succeed. They wanted to see my hard work. And that was so comforting about it. But I'm like, I'm done. I've spent 9 months of my life dedicated to this project. I have an entire class dedicated to it. I've made the greatest friends I could have ever asked for because of this project. And it's like done. And I don't know what to do with myself. I'm actually going to bed at like 11 o'clock every night right now, which is like unheard of. Usually I go to bed between like 2 and 3 a.m. And it's unheard of for me to go to bed at like 11. And it's wonderful because I just don't have like any work hanging over me anymore.
I love it. I love it. So that kind of segues into the topic that we selected for today, which is change.
Yeah. It's
You are in the middle of a lot of change, Eva. You're a graduating senior, accepted into Samford University. Go Bulldogs here
Go
in Birmingham.
Bulldogs.
And just a lot of changes coming up for you, for mom, for me. And to be honest about it, we just came up with this topic this
About an hour
morning,
ago.
about an
about,
hour
about,
ago.
about an hour ago. But
People
we
think we're joking when we say there's no script. There is no script. And a lot of times there's no subject till about an hour before time. That is our life. But in that, we always want to get better. We want to try to do roadmaps, not only for the month, but for the year. But anyway, we picked change. And
which
as I was thinking about it, I'm like, we could do part one, two, three, four, and five on how to handle change, how to adapt to change, what change is going to look like. And so let's talk about it.
yeah, it's so the reason I got the idea today is we're reading Hannah Coulter by Wendell Berry in my TGC class right now. And TGC stands for the Great Conversation. All it means is it's history, Bible, literature combined. We read it to book together as a class, and then we sit and a student leads a discussion for an hour and 20 minutes. It's wonderful. It's one of my favorite parts of school, but we're reading it, and it's the story of this woman, especially during World War II. And it's like she's from this little town in Kentucky, and it's a novel. And we were talking about how to handle change and how she handled change and what her response was to it, and like community and all of these things. And I was like, we've both, me and you, have been through so much change in our life. We've been through very different types of change. You've been through a lot of it, obviously, having lived 40, like one more years than me or whatever, and things like that. And so it's like you've experienced technology becoming essentially like the big thing. You've seen changes in the politics and relationships and how that's handled. You've seen changes in the culture. You've seen changes in war. You've seen changes in entering the military, your early childhood, your testimony. All of these things have been huge changes in your life. And I'm 18. I don't have, I wouldn't say massive changes. I've moved from a town I spent the entirety of my life in. I've about to go to college. I'm about to graduate. But change can be small things too. It can be like changing who you hang out with your friends, or how you style your hair. It depends on how much of a creature of routine you are too, is how big the change affects your life. And so it was just a really interesting topic that I thought we could talk a lot about today.
Yeah. And so, when you did that, normally I'm a note taker. So I immediately pulled out my trusty 3M notepad and started chicken scratching some notes. But here, I'm going to throw some thoughts out to you, and then you can pick one of those that you'd really like to focus on. You mentioned a couple of them, but as I think back through my life, obviously there were a lot of personal changes, some of the catastrophe that happened to me early in my early childhood with the multiple deaths of family members that I experienced, and then the parachute accident in the Army. But when I think about change, here are the big ones that I think about. In the Army specifically, when I went in the Army in 1984, we were just in the initial phases of transitioning from manual weapon systems to automated weapon systems. And that included the technology to do what we call firing solutions. In 84, we were still doing a lot of manual computations in that system, in a weapon system. Well, by the time I walked out 22 years later, it had gone from manual computations and what we called line of sight. You have to put your eyes on a target and you have to physically pull a trigger. 22 years later, I walked out and it's all automated, and the weapon systems are basically firing themselves. We called it fire and forget. So there was this massive shift in technology and capability over those 22 years that I saw. And we were constantly adapting, and that's continued in the military services. The second one was in my construction career. I saw a lot of changes over those years. And we went from an in-house database that was designed by our personnel, and then we bought an outside platform. Well, you give up a little bit of control when you do that, because anytime you want that system to do something slightly different, you have to contract in a change order and pay them, the owner, additional money to kind of tailor make that platform, that database, to do what you want it to do. So I saw a lot of changes in the way we did financial systems. Ministry in my career as a pastor and even as a Christian, we've gone from very formal services where we walk in, we do basically a welcome, 3 songs out of a hymnal, pass the offering plate, listen to a 30-minute message, sing a closing song, you're out the door. Very, very formal, very structured. And then we introduced coffee shops in the late 90s and early 2000s. And those of us that had never seen that, it was like, have you lost your mind? We don't do coffee in the lobby, and certainly not coffee in church. Well, we kind of pivoted, to use a term that's been very popular here recently in the business world. We had to pivot because people just didn't want this formal, structured church service anymore. So I've seen that. COVID, we made some big pivots during the COVID years. And then thinking about a couple of more that you and I talked about, banking, online banking. You won't remember this, Eva, but I remember when online banking first became a thing and people were kind of pushing back against it, like, hey, I don't want my information online. Well, hey, here's the rev, or the big reveal. Your information is already online, whether you choose to use it or not. And we had to, people my age had to embrace that thought process, like, hey, the information's out there, it's automated, and you'd make it a lot easier on yourself with bill pay and just all these automated systems that are available, Quicken, those types of things that have become popular. So that was a big change. And then now the most recent, you've lived through the age of the iPhone, but before iPhones, we went through a plethora, that's a big word, but a myriad of different devices. And then now a plethora, myriad, multiple. How about that? Multiple. Then now we're faced with, what's the biggest change that I can think of right now is AI. How are we going to use AI and adapt to that in business, in the military, socially, in ministry, all of it? So anyway, what are your thoughts on that?
I think, oh my gosh, there's so many you named. I think COVID is probably the biggest change that my life had seen. Because obviously, I always grew up, I had a tablet, I had like little things like that growing up. So, technology is something that I've always had. So, that wasn't a huge change for me. Moving was a big change, but that happened after COVID. And so I was a lot more prepared for it because of COVID. And so I would say COVID was the biggest change. I went from my entire life being in a physical classroom and doing all of these things to now being online, which opened the door for me to get an online education and for us to seek that out when I thrived in that environment. I don't think y'all ever thought that I would thrive in a homeschool environment. And so that change, it's the greatest change that could ever happen. We've talked about this before in our COVID episode about how while COVID was a terrible time for a lot of people, it was one of like the greatest 3 months of our lives because we got each other back. You weren't working as much. We all had to slow down. We had
Did you
family.
say 3 months?
Yeah, it wasn't enough.
That was almost a year.
Well, no, but I mean like the quarantine period itself, because
Yeah. Okay.
yeah, COVID itself was big. But I'm saying like when we were home every single day before church services started back, before school became an option again that fall, before we started vacationing again that summer, like there were some big changes. And so it was like we were home every single night. We ate dinner as a family every single night. We woke up all together around the same time. We played games. We did all of these things. And my best friend in the whole wide world, I would have never become friends with her had we not bonded over One Direction of all things during quarantine. We hated each other in middle school. We competed to constantly be the best. And when we no longer had that like stage to compete on and compete for, we became incredible friends. And she is my best friend. And I followed her to this school because she moved because she was a military kid. And it's been the greatest thing I've ever done in my life. But it was this like weird and challenging thing of like, how is this going to work? What does this look like? Nobody had ever seen this before. Technology, the huge boom, we saw the whole world shut down. And we were talking about that today in class. We were talking about, because this the book we were reading takes place during World War II, and how like the community as a whole was grieving because everybody had lost someone during the war. And so it was talking about like the membership in the community, and how at some point in life we've lost that community mindset for a more individualistic one. And like what you were talking about at the dinner table last night about how like parenting, it used to take a village, and now we've kind of shifted to more very individualistic style of parenting and things like that. And so it's very interesting because we were talking about it, and my teacher had asked us, he said, do you think our current generations could handle another world war like they did in the 20s? Like, do you think they could handle it? And everybody said no. And then somebody said, actually, we would have to. And my teacher, well, I'm like, yeah, we would have to, but I think there would be a lot of civil like fighting. I think there'd be a lot of blaming. I think social media would make it a whole lot bigger than it is. And we were just talking about like, how do you handle change like that? How do you handle change? Because we barely made it through the pandemic. Think about how much chaos and tension and confusion was happening during the pandemic. And it was like, how would we handle something so violent? How do we handle such big changes? And and every single person in my class, we're about to go to college, we're about to graduate. So it's like, how do you handle that change? How do you handle your entire livelihood being uprooted and you going somewhere doing something you've never done before? And so it was just a really, 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 really interesting conversation. And I think COVID, while it hurt a lot of our educations, it did prepare us for this change because we now know how to like handle it. But that's just my long thought.
Yeah, I think that's great. And it is interesting. You and I have talked a lot about it, and it's just been a topic of conversation. I was in Montgomery yesterday talking to some doctors and some people in the state government and just talking about different issues that we're faced with across the state. And not only here, but in our country, across the world. But one of the things that I've noticed when you start talking about change, being from the South and being from a rural community, it has become obvious to me over the years. I just notice it when I'm out driving around. There's a lot of these small churches, and I'm talking about churches that are less than 200. In some cases, they're 100, maybe 50 membership, but they were founded in the 1800s, a lot of them in the late 1800s after the Civil War. And what you will notice with a lot of these small rural churches is there's a cemetery right next to them. So you have church, you have cemetery. Well, what does that tell you? The community used to revolve around the church. The
Yep.
church was the central focus. I mean, in a lot of communities, you had a Baptist church on one corner, a Methodist church on the other. You may have had an Assembly of God, a Church of Christ, but a lot of times they were right there in the town square together. And in most instances, there is a church cemetery, and it's what those of us that are in ministry call cradle to grave ministry. That's what it was. People were born into that church family. They grew up in it. They went to Sunday school. They got married. They raised their own kids in that church, and then they died and they were buried in the church cemetery. Well, the more we've become a urban society and people have moved out of farming communities, you've kind of separated our culture. And again, it's just change. It's just the way it is. But we've separated people not only from these smaller churches that were the central focus of the community, we've separated them from the land to a
Yeah.
large degree.
Yeah.
We come from a heritage of farming, and we no longer own farmland. We sold that about 6 years ago. And it was difficult for me because that land had been in our family for 70 years. That was a change for me to acknowledge that I am not a farmer. I'm never going to be a farmer, but I came from a farming community, and that the way that that community was knit together, I'm never going to forget that. And so I have to change based on the environment that I currently live in. But here's the thing, I'm not going to forget the traditions. I'm not going to forget the culture. I'm not going to forget the heritage and the values that I learned in that small farming rural community, even though I live in a suburb in a larger metro
Yeah.
area now.
No, I completely agree. Like literally, that is what the book we're reading is about right now. It's all about how you can't handle change especially like because a big portion of the book has to deal with like grieving in a community and how like grieving takes membership, which is the term they use for a community, and like how collective grieving and individual grieving are two completely different things. But one of the big plots of like what we were talking about was like home is and the people you love and change. You're never going to be happy with the change being made if you don't love the land that you're on and the people you're with. And what you just said, I'm going to read a quote from the book. You really set this up perfectly, but it's from Hannah Coulter.
You're
Hannah
welcome. You're
Coulter, thank
welcome.
you. It's from Hannah Coulter from by Wendell Berry. It says, but the cities are overflowing and stepping toward us too. And then Mr. Felter, who's a character, he says, in his last years, he said, you see those old hillsides of mine. Someday they'll be covered up with little huts. Maybe so, or maybe all our work and care will be bulldozed away to make room for something fancier, for Port Williams Estates or Sand Ripple Park or Sandhurst in the Meadows. Okay, so that's all about like how the bigger cities they keep expanding, and these communities that have grown up loving the land, loving the farm, loving the community they're with, going to these two churches, the cradle to grave areas. What happens is these big cities they keep growing. People want to be in the city, and then they want to go to the suburbs once they start having a family. So they keep building out, building out, building out. And these communities that have had this cradle to grave mindset and have worked off the land and loved the land and they've loved the community in it. Now there's all of these people who have no appreciation for the land and no appreciation for the people in it. And they want to do things their way, the city way, not the way this community has done it. And it's causing a lot of tension because then the older generations, they're like, this isn't how we used to do it. This town used to be thriving. This used to be a hot spot for farmers and all of these things. And then these new families coming in, they're like, yeah, but this is where we want to build our home now. This is where we live. This is how we do things. And so this the next part of the book quote. It says most people are looking for a better place, which means that a lot of them will end up in a worse one. I think that what Nathan, this is Hannah Coulter's husband, Nathan learned from his time in the army and the war is he saw a lot of places and he came home. And I think he gave up on the idea that there's a better place somewhere else, as there is no better place than this, not in this world. And but it is by the place we've got and our love for it and our keeping of it that this world is joined to heaven. And it's just this really cool thing because she's talking about previously how her and her husband are moving off of the homestead that they built for so many years, the land that they've loved, that they've curated, that they've taken care of, that every tree they've planted. And she's like, a part of me hopes that a new family comes in and loves it. But then another part of me wishes for it to all burn down because I don't want somebody to come in and not appreciate the love we've built this house on and the love we've given to this land and the children we've raised in it and all of these things. And I think it's just an important mindset when coming to change is if you don't love where you are now and you don't love the people you're with, you go and make change and you try and immediately go in and make change in a new place, like they said with your bulldozing the hills. If you immediately go into a new place and you try and make changes immediately without learning to love the land and love the people and understanding why they do it that way and then saying I love the way you do that, it would be easier on you if maybe we made this change. But if you just come straight in and say, I'm going to make all of these changes, you completely disrespect the land and the love that these people have dedicated their lives to building. And I think that's so important, like about to go to college. It's if I don't love my home now and I don't love the people that are in it, then when I come home, it's going to mean nothing to me. And I'm going to go try and build a home there, not knowing what love is and how to steward it and take care of it. And, stewardship, it's all about leaving a legacy of love, taking care of those in front of you and all of these things. And so when I go to college, because I have this foundation of love and care for the home I've built, I want to build a home there. I want to find people to love and to build with my life with and spend time with. But if I didn't have that foundation here, I wouldn't know how to do it in college. And so it's making that change so much easier. Having that foundation of saying, I know what home feels like, and I know how to make other people feel at home because I've been taught how to do it in the home that my parents have built and the home that we've stewarded, the home that we've taken care of. And I'm going to go do the same thing in that college. And I'm going to go and find people to love and find people to spend life with. And so I think that's just really important. And I loved this book because of it. And so it's like change only is good for you if you have the right mindset going into it. Otherwise, it's just going to leave you worse off than you started.
Yeah, and that reminds me of something. I think John Maxwell said it, but leaders, and I think it also goes to anybody really, we have to be able to see first and see farthest because change is coming.
Yep.
And I think that's a great way to approach it. When I sold our family farm, I just had to see down the road and realize, hey, you're not, this is not where you're coming back to. You don't have a passion for farming, and you're going to have to make some hard decisions with this. And what we have taught you, even though that piece of land is always going to be extremely special to me,
Mhm.
because there are a lot of memories on that property. It's not the property itself.
Yep.
It's who was on the property, the
Yep.
family that again
Yep.
taught me my values, my heritage, the traditions, and I carry Ma and Pa in my heart every day. And we talked a lot about that. One of these days, your mother and I will be gone, but we're teaching you, hey, we're going to be with you the whole time because we have done our best to transfer a legacy to you. And by the way, remember, legacy is not what you leave for someone, it's
Mhm.
what you leave in
Yep.
someone. And that's exactly what we're talking about. It's something far beyond property, buildings, the land, etc. It's what people, the deposit that we make in each other as a
Yep.
family unit.
And I definitely think that's important in the context of also what I was saying is like Paul and Paul loved and stewarded that land. They had a church, they had a community, and you had left that. You had built your own community. You had found a church, you had found a home, and you had your own established life. And while you loved the land and loved you the people, if you were to ever go back, it would never be able to fall back into that lifestyle of the love and the community that they had built because you would have to build your own. You would have to make change. You would have to do these things and we're not going back. And so it was sitting there rotting away essentially. And it could be so much more of a benefit for somebody else to come in and to steward and to love and to build a community in because that wasn't for us anymore. And that's a part of letting go of change and everything is also being able to let go of it and let go of things you've held on to and still hold that memory of it. Because I do think that like while we often say, you know, home is like not a person, or it's not a place, it's a person and things like that. I think that's honestly a little bit of a faulty statement because, you know, when you go on a long vacation or a long trip and you come back home and you see those familiar landmarks and you get back in your car and you walk into your house and you have that home smell, you're just hit with a sense of peace, a sense of comfort, a sense of belonging because you've stewarded it, because you love it, because you have a community there. And so, yes, while people do make it, we often do say that the church is not, it's not the building, it's the people. I do think the building, it grounds it. It grounds that home, it grounds that change. Same thing with my home building here is in 6 months, I'm not going to be living here anymore, but it's still going to be a home to me, even if it's not necessarily where, you know, if you and mama moved, that home would change, but my memories would still be here because this is what's ground those memories. When I walk in and I see the scratch on the wall from where y'all carried that armoire downstairs, you know, I'm flooded with memories of it. And those memories are always there, but they're so much more vivid when you can like tie it to a physical place too. And so I think that's so important about change too is it's I don't know, it's just interesting. There's so much going through my head right now if you can't tell, but I think that change is like with COVID, right? Our home had always been our home, but I feel like it got a new definition of home when we started making intentional memories in it. You know, there was a lot of things that like our home was a place we slept. It was a place we occasionally ate because we ate out so much just because we were going. And so during COVID, when we were home, when we were eating, when we were waking up all at the same time, when we were all going to sleep around the same time, when we were sitting on the couch watching those movies for the first time or on the back patio grilling and playing games, the definition of home changed because we were tying memories to that place. And so I think as you approach change in your life, don't be scared to leave the memory behind. Like, don't be scared to leave the place behind because the memories are still intact. But when you revisit it, you're going to be like holding on to those memories. You're going to have them and they're going to play brighter because you're closer to the location they were made. And so, like, going to college, I'm going to make a ton of new memories. I'm going to make a ton of new friends. I'm going to do all of these things. And yes, I'm close to home, but I'm going to be a completely different side of town than I'm familiar with and things. And so when I come home, my life isn't going to be here anymore, but I do have the foundation of those memories to be able to still live life here. You know, I don't completely put my life on pause when I come back because I have the foundation of memory and of that home sense because I have the love for it. And so that's just a word vomit. But
Yeah. Well, you've got a lot of great thoughts in that. And I think we can do a part two of this episode
Yeah.
and unpack, some of those things. Because again, as you think about, here's something I'll tell you, especially military guys, when they pass away and being in ministry as long as I have been, one of the common things that we often hear is they want to go back home. And they're not talking about necessarily the house. They want to go back to the city that they were raised in. And of course, cremation is becoming a much more popular option now in terms of burials. But I'm talking about, even several years back when a large proportion of people were still opting to be buried.
Yep.
A lot of times military guys, they just want to go back home,
Yep.
home being the town. And I can really relate to that. And we can probably unpack that. We've lived you specifically have lived in Montgomery, Birmingham, two distinctly different cities. Mom and I love both of them for different reasons, but there is a piece of me, Wynne, Arkansas is a special, special place to me. And you know this, the more I start talking about it, the more I smile, I laugh. There's so many memories, but you know what? Part of it is tied to a house, but not really. It's tied to that town.
It's tied to the community and the love you had for it.
Absolutely. So I think we can unpack that more in the next episode. But until then, let's remember, regardless of what happens, let's always be able to talk. We're going to get that right on the next episode.
Yeah, well, the problem is there's delay between us.
I know. First video. What do you think?
I think it went really well. Really well. There's a little bit of a delay where like I say something and it takes you like a second to catch up, and then you say something and it takes me a second to catch up, I think, even though we're literally sitting next door to each other. But regardless of what happens, let's be able to talk. Let's find new ways to adapt and new ways to change. But don't and I think the moral of it is as long as you have a love for the place you're in now, change is always easier because you can come back to it. You can come back to that familiarity, but if you completely throw away that love, or if you never build a love for where you are now, even when you're in at a very low place in your life, if you don't love who you are, then it's very hard to feel comfortable if you ever end up back in that situation. But if you have that love and appreciation for it, or you have a community of people that help you, have that home, you can handle a lot more change and growth and all of these things because you're not alone in it, but you understand that there is more to it. There is more to process. There is more to live. There is more to do. And I think that's the part of change is if you're not ready for it, you're not going to appreciate it. But if you're willing to adapt with it and change with it, change can be the most beautiful, beautiful thing. And so
I love that. One of the things that I read in terms of a quote, I have no idea who said it, I just remember it, but you can have three responses. You can be fearful of change, you can be hopeful for change, or you can be inspired by change.
Yep.
And so I choose to be inspired by
Yep.
it. Let's figure it out and do it. So until next time, you ready?
Yeah, I don't know.
Regardless of what happens, let's always be able to talk.
From generation to generation. Also, because we don't have that old audio clip anymore, if you want to hear more from us or see more from us, our social medias are G2G_podcast on Instagram and Generation to Generation on Facebook.
Precisely.
Bye.